Hello and welcome, and can you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I promise I won't swear.
Okay.
My name is Wayne Murray, and what else will I do when I introduce myself?
Are you young?
Oh, okay. I am nearly 80 years of age. Yes.
And where were you born?
I was born in Wellesley Hospital in 1940 in Toronto.
Can you give me a little bit more of your family history?
Yes. Well, what I'd like to do to start with is show this lovely picture of my mom and dad. And this is a famous saying from Robert Louis Stevenson. I'm glad that in my youth, my parents planted the seeds of love instead of the seeds of hate. And that has been throughout my entire life, a life of really wonderful parents and love and wonderful time.
That's perfect. And for any of us that know you, Wayne, that's very true. And they'd be very proud of you because you've done exactly that.
Thank you.
Very true. Do you have anything else that you'd like to share about your family?
Yes. I'm going to start a couple of generations ago.
Perfect.
We had incredible sadness in our family in 1914 when my 23-year-old grandmother died in childbirth. And we have these wonderful flowers here at Matthew's house. And one of them is for my mom and dad.
Yes.
And one of them is for my grandmother, who I said died in childbirth at the age of 23, and for all the other young mothers who've died in childbirth. And often here at Matthew's house, people come up to me and say, I saw that and it was so wonderful to see. So I'm glad I did that, Deb. Now, my granddad never really got over his wife dying. He spent the rest of his life in a bookstore that he had at Wellesley and Young from 1920 until 1958.
Wow.
And then in 1938, my mom and my dad got married. My dad came from England when he was a 13-year-old boy. And always, because my granddad was at loose ends, my mom and dad provided a home for him. And he went every day to his store and came home every night and lived with us until I was 17. So I grew up in what's called a three-generational family. And I'm very comfortable with different generations. And anyway, he died when I was 17. And yeah, my dad worked all his life. My mom spent her life not as a real estate lady, but making smart real estate investments. So that's another thing I'd like to comment about. Our life, we started out always in beautiful homes. My dad really could have cared less where he lived. But for Mom, it was very important to live in a nice home. So we lived in North Toronto in a lovely house surrounded by doctors. We then went to Islington, a beautiful old English house. Then we went to Port Credit, right by the river, in a forest, a beautiful forest. And from there we went to Oakville. Then in 1960, we went to visit friends up in the Hockley Valley, and they had 3 acres on the Nottawasaga River. They'd been trying for over a year to sell it because they weren't well. My mom and dad bought it right then and there at the dining room table. And that 3 acres was our little cottage. But 10 years later, my mom and dad built a house on 10 acres next door. And that became our home until 2014 when I downsized and sold it. As well as lovely homes, Deb, we always went to cottages on Lake Simcoe. Belleurt, very beautiful area. Then Shanty Bay, which is north of Barrie, and it's right on, Belleurt is on Cook's Bay, which is a shallow area of Lake Simcoe. Shanty Bay is on the open lake, and every year ice would come in and scoop all kinds of land out. Unbelievable difference. And then we went to Alcona and had a cottage there from 1974 until 2009, when our neighbors said, please sell it to us, we would love it. So we did. And then I was, for a few years, after my mom had passed away, at our home in Hockley. I downsized that in 2014 and was very happy to go back to Lake Simcoe to Sandy Cove Acres. And that's a seniors community, which is one of the nicest places I've ever been, because I'm surrounded by wonderful old folks, 90% of whom have dogs. The rule is you walk for an hour in the morning, an hour in the afternoon, an hour in the evening, and I have large milk bones for big dogs, little milk bones for little ones. And it just makes a lovely life.
Yeah, so that's where you live now.
That's where I live now.
What kind of education did you have, and where did you work over your years?
Okay. I graduated from York University in 1968 with an honors degree in psychology. And then I was accepted into a master's degree program at the University of Toronto and graduated from that in 1971 and started a PhD program, but was offered a wonderful job and just let the PhD part of it kind of go by the way. And so from 1971 until 2006, I kept myself employed, first with the Ontario March of Dimes for 5 years, then with Jewish Vocational Services for another 12 years, then 17 years at the Canadian Hearing Society, where I communicated with deaf and hard of hearing people. And they all would laugh at me and say, he's dumb. And I would say, I'm not dumb, I'm slow. There's a difference. Anyway, in between time, I started a workshop here in Alliston. For nearly all of my working life, I did volunteer work as well. And so I was doing volunteer work here in Alliston, and the board of directors asked me if I would start a program that was called AdTech and is now known as CLASS. And that training program is right here in Matthew's house, as a matter of fact. And then I was invited to come over to Newmarket and direct a residence over there that had 25 people in it. And that was wonderful, yeah. So my actual work as a psychometrist, what I did, I would test people. Everybody I worked with either had a physical or a psychiatric disability. Right. And I represented the Vocational Rehabilitation Services part of the Ministry of Community and Social Services. So I started out by doing psychological testing with each person so that I could tell them what their vocational strengths and weaknesses were. Then it was my job to develop an educational training program for them. But it had to be focused on what their potential was. Right. And the government was putting thousands and thousands of money into each one of these people. They wanted to know that whoever was monitoring them knew what they were doing. And my role, I stayed with these people until they were trained. Then I found jobs for them, and then I monitored them for a year after. Then they were on their own. So that's my education and my work history. And I retired in 2006 from the Canadian Hearing Society, and that's work.
It's interesting because I hear so much of your grandpa's bookstore coming out through all of your learning.
Oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
yes, yeah,
Very true.
yeah. My grandfather actually, in 1939, he moved 30,000 books into Pickard Storage, and then he opened his second store on Yonge Street at Wellesley and had 40,000 books in there. Now, many of those books were just books that people would read,
Right.
but a lot of them were first editions and valuable books. And when he passed away, Dr. Wallace, who was the head librarian at the University of Toronto, he was retiring at that time, and he was opening his own store. He came to my mom and bought thousands of dollars worth of valuable books. And then at the same time, my grandfather had helped a lady. She became a widow, and she said, I don't know what I'm ever going to do to raise my kids. And my grandfather said, well, you have this house here on Spadina. You've got all your husband's books. Why don't you open a bookstore? And she did. And she called it the Side Door. And in her autobiography, she says, John Worden got me into the book business.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you have an involvement with the Enniskillen Historical Society.
Well, I have lived since 2014 at Sandy Cove Acres. And one of the first things that happened to me, I was in Foodland, and who comes up to me but the former executive director from here, Pat James. I said, what are you doing here? She said, I'm a minister and my church is just down the street. Why don't you come? I said, I'm not religious, I have no interest. She said, come and see what we do. I did. And the people there just reached out to me so beautifully that I went there every week. And one of the ladies said to me, tell me your story, because I'm involved with the Innisfil Historical Society. And her name is Donna Weiss. And she took all my information, and then what she does a profile on each person and puts your information in the Innisfil Historical Society.
Nice.
Yeah,
That's a lovely
yeah,
piece.
it is nice.
To Alliston a little bit,
Yeah.
what part of your legacy, is at the Museum on the Boyne in Alliston?
That's a nice story, Deb.
That is my first story that I ever had the honor of hearing from you, so that's why I'd love you to share it.
I downsized significantly when I sold my property in Hockley. That was 12 acres and 1,200 feet on the Nottawasaga River. And I happened to know Katie, who is the curator at the Museum on the Boyne. She said, oh my God, we've always wanted a dining room suite. So I said, well, now you've got it. So I donated our family dining room suite from 1910 to the Museum on the Boyne. It's there, and when you go in the front door, the buffet is used as the first piece of furniture when you walk in.
Special.
So then I also, on the second floor, they have a whole gallery of oil paintings. My mom's oil painting is there. My dad's oil painting is there. So I feel my whole family is kind of represented there.
That's nice, and that's what leaving our legacy is really all about. And you've done such a wonderful job for you and your family, so I'm very proud of what you've done.
Yeah.
So when and why did you become involved with Matthews House Hospice?
Oh, what a story that is. My dad died when he was 77, and then I simply became a companion for my mom. I went back home. And you're asking me.
When and why did you become involved with Matthews House Hospice?
Yes. My mom was as healthy as could be until she was 95, and then she started to go downhill, and significantly in the last 6 months when she was 97. So my doctor said, Wayne, you cannot be the sole caregiver for your mom. I'm referring you to Matthews House. And Sally Taylor turned up and was absolutely wonderful with me and my mom. And Sally has been my hero, our savior ever since then. Anyway, I came to the caregivers group, and Mom died. And after a few months, when I started to feel better, I thought, you know, I'm going to try and give back to people at Matthews House what they gave to me when I was a client. And so at first I drove around and visited, because Matthews House was 2 houses then, and everybody was in their houses, and I would go and visit people. And then one of the counselors there said, we want to start a men's group. And so Frank Taylor and me and Don Gates, we started this men's group for about 10 fellows. We were down in the basement, and we played Monopoly and euchre and all kinds of games. And after a few months, Wendy, the counselor, came downstairs, said to me, Wayne, this is not what I had in mind for a men's group. All I hear is laughing and games. I wanted it to be a little more serious, an opportunity for people to talk about their feelings. So we switched the whole focus, had a little bit of fun, and then started to encourage people to talk about their feelings. And that was 10 years ago.
You're still going strong.
And here I am still going strong, sometimes behaving myself and sometimes not behaving myself.
One of the little things we've kind of missed a little bit is, what about your love life?
Oh, yeah, yes.
We don't want to forget the love lives now, Wayne, or I'll be in trouble with the girls.
I don't need to look at that. Okay. I met my first fiance at York University. And her name is Rosalind, and she was a lovely, lovely girl. I haven't had luck. I've had 3 wonderful fiancés. Anyway, after our first date in the middle of the summer, she phoned me up and said, Wayne, now I can tell you what my mother doesn't like about you so that you can change it before you come next Friday. Oh, I said, what is it? Well, my mom thinks when you come to my house, because all the neighbors are looking, that you should have your car washed and you should be in a shirt and tie and jacket. Well, it's summer and I was in my hippie phase.
Oh.
So I said, well, Rosalind, you tell your mom not to worry because I won't be back. Oh. And we never saw each other for another 2 years. And then we got together again, and we just spent a lot of time together, but it just didn't work.
Number 2?
Well, actually, Rosalind was number 2. Oh. Number 1 was way back in Hamilton when I was working. I met this wonderful woman. Her name is Esther, and we were involved for 4 years. And when it was time to get married, I made a big mistake. I said, you tell me what you don't like about me, and I'll tell you what I don't like about you. And all I wanted to say was we should eat at home more instead of in the restaurant all the time. And Esther says, well, first off, we could never raise children in this house. I said, why? Because she said, there's nothing but foreigners on this street. And then she said, and if you think I'm going to live in a cottage next door to your mom and dad, you've got another thing coming. We went downhill from there on. Yeah.
Next.
Next was Kathy, very, very lovely lady from Newfoundland. And we carried on for 2 or 3 years. And then one Thanksgiving, my parents were over at the lake, and we were in Hockley, and I thought, and with her 2 boys, 4 and 6. And I thought we were having a great weekend, raking and everything. We went over for Thanksgiving dinner in the restaurant with my folks, and Kathy sits down and says, well, we worked our asses off over at your house. And my mom said, well, Kathy, I never asked you to do that. And there was kind of a tiffle after that. And a few months after that, my dad died, and I got so involved looking after my mom. And Kathy phoned and said, you get back here. You've been gone 4 days, and I feel like I'm the widow. It just kind of,
That was it.
that was it. So I anyway, hobbies, my 2 books, my memoirs. Thank you.
You're welcome.
The ups and downs of mom and dad's life, that's included in everything. And more recently, Deb, I went over about 80 records that I have that were so beautiful that I just did another little book about music therapy. And it's all involved in writing down your favorite music and talking about it.
Perfect.
Yeah. But also, one of the things that my dad loved and I loved are old cars, especially convertibles. We started in 1951, and then 1956, and 1957, and 68, and my mom had a 65 MG that she used to scoot all around in. Gardening is something else I love. And what was the third thing that
I'm not quite sure,
I'm not sure either?
but I'm sure you'll think of it.
Yeah, I bet. Anyway,
Final thoughts that you wanted to leave us with? I think that you had some in our last write-up
yes.
that you wanted to share with us.
and this is a combination of Matthew's house and the church that I joined. And this is a donor profile that Matthew's house produced about me.
Right.
But also part of it is from a sermon from the church, which I have been going to, although I can't say I believe all that. Anyway, this is exactly what my life is like right now. I have 4 loving, interacting communities. One is the caring, loving people who reach out to me at St. James Church in Stroud. 2, my neighbors and friends in Hockley, where I used to live. We've remained close and loving and see each other all the time. 3, my many new friends at Sandy Cove Acres, caring and kind. And 4, the folks at Matthew's House Hospice, like staff and clients and other volunteers. Thank you for putting love and kindness in my life. And that's how I see my life right now, an interaction of 4 different communities that are all interacting and merging with me.
I thank you very much for sharing. It's very special to me.
Well, thank you for asking.
You're most welcome.